In the deepest darkness of Hive City Tertius, where the Emperor's light grows thin and the machinery of progress grinds souls to dust, there exists a faith so pure and terrible that it transcends the boundaries between salvation and damnation. Here, in chambers carved from desperation and lined with the hopes of the forgotten, kneel the faithful servants of the four-armed Emperor, their eyes burning with devotion to a God who promises unity through consumption, love through annihilation, and eternal peace through the complete extinction of self. The air thrums with psychic resonance as Jackson Mercator genuflects before an altar that would drive sane men to madness. Four arms reach out in benediction from crude carvings, while star charts marked with alien glyphs promise the coming of salvation from beyond the void. The candles that illuminate this sacred space are fashioned from recycled promethium, their flames dancing like tiny souls, eager to join the greater conflagration that awaits all flesh. In their flickering light, the shadows take on shapes that human eyes were never meant to perceive, tentacles that caress rather than strangle, claws that embrace rather than rend, and mouths that sing hymns of perfect hunger. Jackson's lips move in whispered prayer, the words a mixture of broken High Gothic and something far older, far more primal. The language flows from his tongue like honey mixed with acid, each syllable a betrayal of his species and a celebration of his true purpose. His fellow cultists join their voices to his, creating a harmony that resonates not just through the air but through the fabric of reality itself. This is the song of the brood mind, the collective consciousness that binds them all in purpose and destiny, the voice of something so vast and alien that its love feels like drowning in an ocean of stars. But this devotion was not born in an instant. Like all the greatest faiths, it grew from seeds planted in fertile soil, tended by patient hands, and watered with the tears of those who had lost everything else. 3 generations ago, when the mining world of Excavatus Prime still prospered under the Emperor's dominion, a derelict space hulk had drifted into the outer system like a gift from the void itself. The Planetary Defense Force, overwhelmed by pirates and Xenos raiders, gave it only cursory attention before classifying it as harmless debris. They could not have imagined that within its twisted corridors, something ancient stirred, something that had waited millennia for this moment, this opportunity, this perfect convergence of desperation and hope. The first Genestealer patriarch to emerge from that floating tomb was a creature of sublime horror and terrible beauty. Its forearms moved with hypnotic grace as it surveyed the world spread below, its alien intelligence cataloging the weaknesses and desires of humanity with the patience of a gardener studying soil. What it saw was a world ripe for the harvest, overcrowded hab blocks where families of 12 squeezed into spaces meant for 2, industrial complexes where workers died daily in preventable accidents that were cheaper than safety measures, and administrative districts where the wealthy lived in climate-controlled luxury, while their workers breathed toxic fumes and counted themselves lucky to have employment at all. The patriarch did not see these conditions as injustices to be corrected, but as opportunities to be exploited. Humanity's suffering was not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to be opened, a weakness through which the Great Devourer's love could flow. For the Tyranid Hive Mind had learned long ago that the most effective weapon against any species was not tooth or claw, but hope itself, the desperate, clinging hope of beings who had been offered nothing but pain, and were willing to accept any promise of something better. Jackson's grandfather had been among the first to feel the patriarch's kiss, there, in the deepest mining shaft of Sector Gamma 7, where the air was thick with sulfur and the darkness pressed down like a living thing. Marcus Mercator had been a loyal imperial citizen, a man who said his prayers to the Emperor each morning and gave thanks for his daily rations each night. But loyalty and gratitude could not fill the void in his chest, could not ease the ache of watching his children grow thin on workers' rations, while the overseer's family lived like nobility in the upper hab blocks. When the patriarch emerged from the shadows, Marcus should have screamed, should have run, should have died in terror, rather than submit to the alien presence that radiated power like heat from a forge. Instead, he found himself paralyzed, not by fear, but by recognition. He was something that offered not just survival, but belonging. The kiss that followed burned like ice and fire combined, rewriting his genetic code and flooding his mind with visions of cosmic unity that made his previous prayers to the Emperor seem like the babbling of an infant. The transformation was agony beyond description, yet Marcus experienced it as ecstasy beyond imagination. His screams of pain became hymns of joy as the broodmind embraced him, showing him glimpses of the Star Children's promise, Tyranid, a galaxy united under the loving tyranny of perfect consumption, where hunger and want were unknown, because all boundaries between self and other had dissolved into beautiful, terrible oneness. The genetic restructuring that should have killed him instead elevated him, making him something more than human, while paradoxically making him more human than he had ever been before. In the years that followed, Marcus learned to live the sacred lie that all true faithful must master. By day, he operated heavy mining equipment in the sulfur-choked depths of the excavation zones, his productivity earning him commendations from supervisors who saw only a dedicated worker. His fellow miners saw a quiet, reliable colleague who could be counted on to take extra shifts when quotas fell behind. None suspected that behind his eyes burned the light of Xenos revelation, or that every prayer to the Emperor was spoken with bitter irony, every imperial hymn transformed in his mind into a mockery of his former ignorance. The constant psychological strain of maintaining the imperial facade would have broken a lesser man, but Marcus found strength in the broodmind's constant presence. Even in the deepest shafts, even surrounded by the unenlightened masses of baseline humanity, he was never truly alone. The collective consciousness of the cult whispered to him constantly, offering guidance, comfort, and the unshakable certainty that his suffering served a greater purpose. Every day of deception brought the day of ascension closer. Every night of secret worship strengthened the bonds that would ultimately unite all life in perfect harmony. The cult grew slowly, carefully, with the patience that only true faith can sustain. Marcus identified others whose desperation made them receptive to the patriarch's gift: the widow whose husband had died in a mining accident, the young man whose sister had been press-ganged into the Imperial Guard, the elderly woman whose pension had been reallocated to support the war effort. Each new convert brought their own network of family and friends, expanding the web of influence one carefully chosen soul at a time. Secret meetings were held in abandoned industrial sections and forgotten maintenance tunnels, spaces where the Emperor's light had never penetrated and Imperial surveillance had never reached. Here, the faithful gathered to share their visions and plan for the glorious future that awaited them all. Coded messages were hidden in shift schedules and work orders, sacred icons were carved into machinery and concealed behind access panels, and the hymns of the four-armed emperor were hummed as work songs by miners who thought they were singing old folk tunes from their homeworlds. When Marcus's son David was born, the genetic markers of the cult were already written into his DNA. The child grew up knowing two realities: the harsh world of imperial doctrine that governed his daylight hours, and the warm embrace of the broodmind that welcomed him into its loving darkness each night. By the time he was old enough to understand the difference between truth and lies, the distinction had become meaningless. The imperial creed was the lie he told to survive. The cult's teachings were the truth that would set him free. David married within the cult, as was proper, and when his own son Jackson was born, the genetic legacy had progressed even further. Where Marcus had been purely human before his transformation, and David bore only subtle markers of hybrid heritage, Jackson represented the cult's growing strength and purpose. His reflexes were faster than baseline human norms, his intuition sharper, his connection to the broodmind more intimate and immediate. He was, in every sense that mattered, a superior being, living proof of the Star Children's promise to elevate humanity beyond its current limitations. Yet with each passing generation, the weight of hidden truth grew heavier. Jackson felt it most acutely during the mandatory imperial devotions that punctuated each work shift. As he knelt with his fellow miners before the golden aquila, listening to sermons about the Emperor's divine protection and humanity's manifest destiny among the stars, the contrast between imperial promises and imperial reality became ever more stark. The Emperor's protection did not extend to workers who died in preventable accidents. Humanity's destiny seemed to involve endless toil in service of masters who viewed their subjects as expendable resources. The broodmind offered a different vision, a future where such suffering would be impossible because the very concept of separation between ruler and ruled, master and servant, had been dissolved into perfect unity. When the Great Devourer finally arrived, There would be no more hive cities choking on their own fumes, no more workers ground to dust in service of distant nobles, no more families torn apart by the demands of endless war. There would only be the hunger that united all things, the love that consumed all barriers, and the peace that came when every voice joined the eternal song. As the years passed, and the cult's influence spread throughout Excavator's prime, Jackson found himself taking on greater responsibilities within the sacred hierarchy. He learned to identify potential converts among the unenlightened, to speak the coded phrases that would mark him as a friend to the faithful, and to perform the rituals that would ease new souls into the broodmind's embrace. Each successful conversion filled him with joy that surpassed any pleasure the Imperial world could offer. Each new brother or sister who joined their cause brought the day of ascension measurably closer, but with greater responsibility came greater knowledge, and with greater knowledge came greater burden. The visions granted by the broodmind grew more intense and more detailed as Jackson's connection to the collective consciousness strengthened. He saw the Great Devourer's approach not as a distant promise, but as an immediate reality, in vast bioships that moved between the stars like living worlds, tentacled monstrosities that could reshape matter at the molecular level, and swarms of creatures so perfectly adapted to their purpose that they made human military forces seem like children playing with toys. Some part of Jackson's mind, the part that remained purely human, recoiled in primitive terror from these visions. The images were of consumption so complete that it left nothing behind, hunger so vast that it could devour entire star systems, and intelligence so alien that human concepts of mercy and compassion were not even relevant considerations. But his conditioned consciousness, shaped by 3 generations of careful breeding and constant exposure to the broodmind's influence, interpreted these same images as divine revelation. The terror was transformed into awe, the revulsion into anticipation, and the fear into the purest love he had ever experienced. The psychological warfare between human instinct and alien conditioning created a constant tension that Jackson learned to embrace as a sign of his growing enlightenment. Doubt was simply the last vestige of his inferior human nature, struggling against the superior wisdom of the Star Children. Each moment of uncertainty was an opportunity to prove his faith, each flash of fear a chance to demonstrate his commitment to the greater purpose. The broodmind taught him that this internal conflict was not a weakness to be overcome, but a sacred fire to be tended, a reminder of how far he had evolved from his merely human origins. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of his devotion to bear. Surrounded by unenlightened humans who lived their lives in ignorant blindness, Jackson often felt like a god forced to dwell among insects. Their concerns seemed so petty, their hopes so limited, their fears so insignificant compared to the cosmic drama in which he played a starring role. When his co-workers complained about overtime or safety regulations, he wanted to laugh at their inability to see that such trivial matters would soon be rendered utterly meaningless. When they spoke of their children's futures or their own retirement plans, he had to suppress the urge to tell them that the only future that mattered was the one that would arrive with the bioships. As the day of ascension drew nearer, the signs became impossible to ignore. Astropathic communication with neighboring systems grew increasingly unreliable as the Great Devourer's shadow fell across the local warp routes. Strange lights appeared in the night sky, moving in patterns that defied conventional stellar mechanics. Orbital sensors detected gravitational anomalies at the edge of the system that the Imperial Navy attributed to natural phenomena, but which the cult recognized as the harbinger of their salvation. The Patriarch's communications through the broodmind grew more urgent and more specific. Weapons caches were to be prepared. Key infrastructure was to be identified for protection or destruction as appropriate, and unenlightened humans were to be sorted into categories based on their potential for conversion or their value as genetic material. The time for patience was ending. The time for action was at hand. Jackson felt his heart racing as he participated in the final preparations, his hybrid physiology responding to the approaching climax with heightened senses and increased physical capability. Every nerve ending was alive with anticipation, every breath filled with the promise of transformation, every heartbeat a countdown to the moment when the lies would finally end and the truth would be revealed to all. The weight of 3 generations of hidden faith would finally be lifted, replaced by the glorious burden of open worship and honest purpose. When the skies above Excavatus Prime finally burned with alien fire as the Tyranid fleet emerged from the warp, Jackson stood with thousands of his broodkin in ecstatic revelation. This was it, the moment 3 generations of faithful had awaited, the culmination of decades of careful planning and patient suffering. Around him, his fellow cultists cast off their imperial disguises like shed skin, revealing their true forms in glorious rebellion against the tyranny of ignorance. 4 armed hybrids emerged from hiding places throughout the Hive City, their weapons blessed by the Patriarch's touch, and their hearts singing with the joy of finally being able to express their true nature. The miners who had worked beside Jackson for years revealed themselves as his brothers in faith, their human facades melting away to expose the beautiful mutations that marked them as children of the Star Children. The supervisors and administrators who had oppressed them for so long were revealed as either fellow believers who had played their roles to perfection, or enemies who would now face the consequences of their blind allegiance to the false emperor. The uprising was coordinated with precision that would have impressed even the most experienced Imperial tacticians. Cult cells across the planet activated simultaneously, seizing control of communication centers, power plants, and defensive installations before the planetary government could mount an effective response. The PDF forces that attempted to resist found themselves facing enemies who knew every weakness in their defenses, every flaw in their equipment, and every name on their rosters. The cult had been preparing for this moment for generations, and their patience was finally rewarded with overwhelming tactical advantage. Jackson participated in the liberation of his own mining facility with savage joy, his hybrid strength allowing him to tear through security barriers that would have stopped normal humans cold. The overseers, who had treated him as an expendable resource, found themselves face to face with the consequences of their cruelty, and Jackson felt no mercy as he showed them the same consideration they had shown their workers over the years. This was justice in its purest form, to our stray, the weak finally rising up to claim their rightful place above their former oppressors. The slaughter of unbelievers who refused the gift of transformation was both terrible and beautiful to behold. These were souls so corrupted by imperial doctrine that they could not recognize salvation even when it was offered freely. Their deaths were not murders but mercy killings, ending the suffering of minds too small and twisted to comprehend the glory that awaited them. Jackson told himself this as he watched his former co-workers die, their blood pooling around the same machinery they had operated together for years. Their inability to see the truth was not their fault. They were victims of the Emperor's lies, deserving of pity rather than hatred. As the bioships descended through Excavatus Prime's atmosphere like living mountains, Jackson felt his heart swell with pride and anticipation. The Great Devourer had indeed come, just as the Patriarch had promised, just as the Broodmind had whispered, just as 3 generations of faithful had believed. The moment of ultimate transformation was at hand, and soon all the suffering and sacrifice would be revealed as necessary steps toward perfect unity. But as the Tyranid organisms began to pour from their living transports, Jackson's elation slowly gave way to confusion, then concern, and finally dawning horror. The creatures that emerged were not the benevolent star children of his visions, but living weapons of terrifying efficiency. They moved with purpose that acknowledged no distinction between cultist and unbeliever, hybrid and baseline human, faithful and heretic. Their hunger was not selective, it was absolute. Jackson watched in mounting terror as his hybrid children were consumed alongside the very humans they had fought to overthrow. The Broodmind's whispers, which had sustained him through decades of hidden faith, became screams of agony as the Hive Mind asserted its dominance over the collective consciousness. The 4-armed emperor he had worshipped was revealed as nothing more than another tool of an intelligence so vast and alien that human concepts of salvation and damnation were meaningless fragments in its cosmic perspective. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had never been the chosen people destined for elevation. They had been biological weapons, living tools designed to weaken their own species from within. The love they had felt from the Patriarch was not divine affection, but the same emotion a farmer might feel for particularly useful livestock. The unity they had been promised was real, but it was the unity of complete dissolution, not transcendence but extinction, dressed in beautiful lies. As his own flesh began to change under the influence of Tyranid bioacids, Jackson experienced a moment of absolute clarity that cut through generations of conditioning like a blade through silk. The cult had achieved its purpose perfectly, exactly as intended. They had helped orchestrate their own species' extinction with enthusiasm and devotion that surpassed even the most fanatical imperial martyr. The tragic irony was perfect in its horror. They had indeed achieved unity through consumption, but not as they had imagined. His final thoughts, as his consciousness dissolved into the hive mind's vast hunger, were not of betrayal or anger, but of profound sadness for all the souls who had shared his delusion. They had been so desperate for meaning, so hungry for purpose, so starved for love that they had embraced their own annihilation rather than face the emptiness of existence without faith. In the end, their devotion had been real even if its object was false, their sacrifice genuine even if its purpose was their own destruction. Excavatus Prime became a lifeless husk within days, its biomass consumed and processed into new Tyranid organisms with ruthless efficiency. When Imperial Navy vessels finally arrived to investigate the loss of communication, they found only empty cities and scoured Earth where a thriving world had once existed. In hidden archives across the sector, Inquisitors studied recovered cult propaganda and intercepted transmissions, trying to understand how an entire world had fallen to Xenos corruption without raising a single astropathic cry for help. The strategic implications were terrifying in their scope. If the Tyranids could turn humanity's own social bonds against itself, if they could weaponize the very hope and faith that sustained imperial civilization, then no world was truly safe from infiltration. The enemy was not just at the gates, it was already inside, wearing human faces and speaking human languages, patient and persistent, and utterly committed to its alien purpose. Inquisitorial protocols were developed to identify and purge hidden infections, but the investigators knew they were fighting a war that might already be lost. The Genestealer phenomenon exploited fundamental aspects of human psychology that could not be eliminated without destroying the social fabric that held imperial civilization together. The same needs that drove people to join the imperial cult, NBS, the desire for belonging, for purpose, for something greater than themselves, made them vulnerable to Xenos manipulation. In the restricted archives of the Ordo Xenos, scholars debated questions that had no comfortable answers. Was Genestealer conditioning fundamentally different from imperial indoctrination? Did the cultists' faith constitute genuine religious experience, or was it merely sophisticated biological programming? If humans could be made to worship their own extinction with such devotion, what did that say about the nature of faith itself? The psychological profiles painted a disturbing picture of true believers whose devotion was absolute and whose sacrifice was willing. These had not been madmen or heretics in the traditional sense, but faithful servants whose only sin was choosing the wrong god to serve. Their commitment to their cause had been every bit as strong as any imperial saint's dedication to the emperor, their willingness to die for their beliefs every bit as noble as any space marine's final charge. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the realization that the cultists had found something in their alien faith that imperial society had failed to provide: IMC, a sense of genuine community, of unconditional love, of absolute purpose that transcended individual suffering. The Tyranids had succeeded not through force but through offering what humanity desperately needed and rarely received. They had weaponized compassion itself. Across the galaxy, in the shadowed depths of 1,000 hive cities, the cycle continues to this day. New patriarchs stir in ancient hulks, new cults gather in forgotten corners, new faithful kneel before four-armed altars, with the same devotion that once moved Jackson Mercator to sacrifice everything for a promise of perfect unity. The Great Devourer's hunger remains patient, eternal, and perfectly adapted to exploit the deepest human need, the desperate desire to belong to something greater than themselves. The faithful continue to gather in the darkness, their prayers rising like incense to gods who hear every word and treasure every soul offered in worship. They sing their hymns of consumption and unity, they share their visions of the glorious future that awaits, and they prepare their children for the day when the bioships will darken the sky and all deception will finally end. Their faith burns as bright as any candle in the Emperor's cathedrals, and their hope is every bit as real as any imperial citizen's trust in the Golden Throne. In the end, perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all, that devotion itself is neither good nor evil, but simply human. The same capacity for faith that creates saints and martyrs can just as easily create willing victims of their own extinction. The same love that binds families together can be turned into a weapon that destroys entire worlds. The same hope that sustains humanity through its darkest hours can become the very thing that leads it into the ultimate darkness. The Genestealer cults represent the perfect corruption of everything that makes humanity worth preserving, and perhaps that is exactly what makes them so effective. They do not destroy human nature, they fulfill it, completely and perfectly, in service of an alien god whose love is real, even if its ultimate expression is annihilation. In the grim darkness of the far future, even salvation can be turned into a weapon, and even the purest faith can lead to the most perfect damnation.